What's up, you creepy fucks, and welcome to the Let's Talk Horror Channel podcast, and welcome to the Creep Zone, where we have very honest, very in-depth, very unfiltered conversations about something from the world of horror. I'm super excited about this episode, not only to speak to this absolute bloody legend on my show today that you can already see. We're going to speak to him in a minute. But I'm excited to talk about it because I really tried on the show recently to try and be as varied, especially when I started doing the video podcasts and all that sort of stuff. I've tried doing a real big, variety, so to speak, of the different types I'm trying to talk about, rather than going old school and just talking about the classics and why they're classics. I'm really trying to speak about, some of the smaller movies, the indies, the ones that no one knows about. Luckily, most of them haven't been shit. In fact, they're never fucking shit, the films I talk about. And that's what I'm really excited about this one, because not only are we talking about a movie that definitely isn't shit, but it is an absolute fucking classic. Today, on this episode, we're going to be talking about The Fly, a movie that I've said this before on some of the other episodes I've done, is that when I first, nearly 4 years ago now, when I first started thinking of movies that I want to talk about on this channel, The Fly was on that list. So I'm really happy that it was sent over to me on the list that I always ask my guests for. And I'm so happy it's on there. I'm so happy we're getting to talk about it. And I'm talking about it with Justin. Justin is the host. Here he is, the host of Pop Culture Reflections podcast. Hopefully I said that right, sort of. I always get it wrong. Did I do it right?
You did it just fine, BP. That is the right thing.
That's it. For once I did something right. But that's it. But yeah, so as I said, Justin, I'm just trying to turn this up. There you go. Justin is, as I said, the host and the creator of the Pop Culture podcast. Pop culture. See, I knew I fucking get it wrong. Pop Culture Reflections podcast, and he's a great podcast. And like I spoke about earlier on, I spoke about the variety, the variness of what I'm trying to create with this series with the video podcast, and obviously turn them into audio, giving you a bigger, wide sort of selection of episodes for different types of horrors. Well, Justin does just that on his podcast, because it's fantastic, because it's all about pop culture, and it's all about, there's so much variety that he speaks about on his show that it's an absolute joy to have him on. And I'm super excited to talk about this movie. Obviously, Justin's going to promote everything about Pop Culture Reflections, Pop Culture Reflections podcast. Is that right?
It's right. You got it.
I'm so. If everybody hadn't noticed, obviously, I doubt myself on every fucking thing I do and say. So,
well, and listen, it's a bit of a mouthful. Trust me, I've almost fucked it up myself on my own show. So,
yeah,
don't feel so bad.
There you go. That's it. Yeah. Well, I'll give myself a little bit of a leeway on it sometimes. But look, Justin, thank you for coming on the show. I'm so excited to have you here.
Listen, thank you, BP. And I'm going to say this because I wanted to say it on air to you, BP. On my show, I've already told the story. I got into podcasting early on. It just wasn't working for me. I didn't have the passion for it, so I gave up a bit. And then I came to Let's Talk Horror, okay? BP, you were the inspiration for me to get back into it. And I'm talking your earlier episodes when you were doing it solo. And I just love the honesty and the earnestness that you brought. And it's like, yes, this is what I want to do. I want to do this. And you would talk on your show about how tough it could be, right? And hoping that people actually care and give a fuck about what you're doing. And just for whatever reason, that just spoke to me. And I'm like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to talk about the things I'm passionate about. And I'm going to hope that people want to come along for the ride. So BP, dude, this is an honor to be on your show, without a doubt. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, thank you. I'm honestly trying not to. It's been a tough week. So the fact that I don't edit these is going to be fucking difficult. Honestly, trying to hold back the tears there because I know. Trust me, my partner will tell you how of an emotionless bastard I am. So honestly, that means the world to me. That you said that, and
you got it. I mean it sincerely, man.
Truly mean it. I really do truly mean that. yeah, it's taking me back. It's taking me back. Sorry. Now we got fucking hell. This is where it goes to show how fucking bad at this I am.
No,
Well, luckily I can take my mind off that and try and keep the tears back. So thank you so much, Justin. That
you
really
got it.
means the world to me.
Absolutely.
But at least we can take I can take my mind off that by talking about such a fucking great movie, like a crazy good movie.
Oh my gosh. Like you said earlier, one of the great horror films of all time. We're going to talk about body horror, BP. I mean, holy shit. And when I get to, my connection to this movie, I'll talk a bit about that. But yeah, like you said, BP, one of the great films. I'm glad we're covering it. It doesn't get talked about enough. So we're going to do it, man. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Absolutely. So this film, it was released in 1986, directed by obviously the legendary David Cronenberg, starring. Now, normally, obviously, I go through quite a few people. I'm not even going to fucking bother because we know whose show this is. Jeff Goldblum, Gina Davis, John Getz. That's all you're getting because we know this really is Jeff Goldblum, Gina Davis being the absolute fucking G's that they are. Like
Yes.
this film is and we're going to get into it all, but this film is a true showcase for every perfect example of how cinema works. And that's a big statement to make at the start of an episode where we're going to get into it all. But obviously, I don't give a fuck. That's what I mean. I genuinely do believe that this is a perfect example of so much that we love about what cinema is and was and will always continue to be. So you're not getting any more cast out of me, but that's probably a good thing because obviously I get all their names wrong all the time anyway. So
I do that too.
yeah. So on IMDb it sits at 7.6 and still at 93% on Rotten Tomatoes. Obviously, it's not the most prestigious thing in the world, Rotten Tomatoes, just like this show. But it's always nice still to see a film like The Fly up there at 93%. It's always a nice little thing to see.
That's where it belongs too.
Absolutely. Google synopsis wise, a scientist creates a teleportation machine and decides to test it. However, a fly enters the machine and their genes get spliced. Gradually, he finds himself transforming into a grotesque creature. That's pretty much it. That's not too bad for Google, I
It's
suppose.
not bad at
I'll let
all.
them have that one.
Yeah.
I'll let them have it. So the first thing I always ask my guests on the show is if you can remember, I'm sure you can with this movie, when did you first see The Fly?
I was 9 years old. It was summer of 1990. I was at a cousin's house. We were going to be watching. I'm a pro wrestling fan. Anybody that listens to my show knows that. We were going to be watching the WWF SummerSlam pay-per-view that same day. And my cousins and I were all playing outside. We came inside, and the parents, the adults, were watching a movie. That movie was The Fly. I was already at 9 years old, into horror. So I sat down, I watched that film. It creeped me out. It got under my skin and stayed there for the rest of my life. Still works to this day, too. So yeah, I remember it almost like it was yesterday, BP.
Awesome. That's such a cool story. This is a movie that I wish that I had it early. Like, obviously my journey through horror started really early. But The Fly was one of those movies, and I've mentioned this before on episodes, that obviously being in the UK, it's fucking shit for horror. We never get fucking anything. Even to this day, we still struggle to get anything that we want to watch. So back then, it was sort of VHS. There was a lot of movies that didn't come out or they're difficult to get. So The Fly wasn't one that I unfortunately didn't get to see like very early. It was one that during my heyday of horror, as I call it, where I was getting every fucking horror movie on DVD that I could. I was getting them imported. I was getting them brought over here. Like anything I could get my hand on, as good or as bad as it possibly was. That's when I was watching just constant horror. Like I'm sure people were probably fucking worried about me, and and The Fly was one of those. So I think that I think I was 14 or 15 when I watched The Fly for the first time. And at that point as well, like some people know that obviously acting and filmmaking, I say it every fucking episode, so people are probably bored about it, but acting and filmmaking is what I've always wanted to do. So at that point, I was really sort of developing that side of my brain where I was just trying to understand filmmaking more and trying to understand acting more. And when I saw The Fly for the first time, like this opened my eyes and my mind to so much more in regards to filmmaking on a technical standpoint, and in awe of how they achieved it in regards to like practical effects, in regards to performances. Like I said, we're going to get into all of this anyway, but this is a movie that I remember like sitting there, and when it finished, my jaw was like dropped,
Yeah.
and I was just like, at 14, 15 years old, just be like, fuck, like I'm so annoyed I didn't see this earlier. But I sort of appreciate that I did see it when I did, because I had already knew what I wanted to do with life. This just sort of almost helped me on that journey a little bit more. Like it's one of those movies that I always consider like not just an amazing movie, but a big inspiration to me
Hmm.
in regards to like going, oh, okay, that is what I want to do. And sometimes you can make something as good as this. Not that I will. I fucking never will. I'm not David Cronenberg. Um, but there we go. So yeah, so like Google said, it's essentially following Jeff Jeff Goldblum, the legendary Jeff Goldblum, who has essentially become Jeff Goldblum in real life and in everything he is now. He's
Yes.
no longer the actor Jeff Goldblum; he is just Jeff Goldblum.
Hmm.
Um, which is, do you know what? If it was other people, I'd probably be a bit annoyed, but because it's Jeff Goldblum, I don't give a fuck because he's so fucking cool.
Absolutely. Yeah, he gets a pass. He can be Jeff Goldblum at
Yeah,
this point. He's earned it.
I think he probably is the coolest nerd that's ever existed.
Yes, I agree.
Like, especially when you see The Fly as well, you're like, this guy is the smoothest fucking geek I've ever heard in my life.
He is, and I said this on the rewatch to my wife. I said nobody could have played Seth Brundle except for Jeff Goldblum. It just he brought such a dimension to this character. It's as almost as if this thing was written for him. This is his movie.
Yeah,
It's insane.
yeah, you're right. And I think I've got down here somewhere in my production thing some of the other people that were sort of in the running to do it. And when I read them, I was quite surprised because I think exactly the same as you. There is no one that can do this because of Jeff Goldblum, and we're getting to why. And it's just so interesting. He's such a unique actor and a unique performer, and it shows in this in all the best ways. But there are some people that could have played the role, that I thought, okay, I can sort of see that. Normally, I'm like, I can't see that at all. But in this one, I can sort of see it. But then I start thinking about, but then you wouldn't get this, and then you wouldn't get this, and you wouldn't get these Goldblumisms that we know and love. That he's, created this whole career out of doing those sort of things. And what a like he's such an underrated gem of a talent, like Jeff Goldblum. Obviously, it's a bit different now, but even like some of his early movies, like there was a film called that we watched all the time called Mr. Frost. And it might have been called something different where you are, it might have been Mr. Frost, but there was something about that movie where the film was utter shit, but he was so fucking good in it. And it's always a movie that me and my friend, we watched it together, and we always talk about Mr. Frost, a movie that no one knows about, and a movie that is just, and all it is Jeff Goldblum being Jeff Goldblum,
There
and
you
but
go.
being so fucking good, and just having still like such like the tightest fucking body that you'll ever see for a nerd. But but
Absolutely.
like I said, before I keep going on about Jeff Goldblum and my love for him, but he's essentially, like it says, he's a scientist. Straight away, we get into it, and that's one of the first things that I've got. That like the first thing to talk about can be the first moments of the movie because you are into it. Like there is no setup for this movie whatsoever. It's so cleverly done, so intelligent filmmaking that straight away the first scene is at a bar with Goldblum, with Gina Davies in their conversation, full swing in chat up mode, and what a cool like entry into a movie.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It really is. It gets right into it right away, and that's what I love about this movie as well.
Yeah, so you got Jeff Goldblum being as smooth as he possibly can, talking to Gina Davies. All he's got is charm, crazy hair, At some point, you definitely know that they're going to fuck, because who can turn down Jeff Goldblum?
Yep.
But yeah, and then what I love about that is that straight away the story evolves from that moment. There's no setup of the backstory of anything. It's literally like, this is this now. I'm going to take you back. I'm going to essentially explain to you everything about what I'm doing, even though I really shouldn't. And then she's like, "Oh, I'm like a reporter." What? You're a fucking reporter? Don't report this shit. And you would think that he would probably try and ask more questions of anybody that's bringing back, that he's trying to tell about teleportation, and and how he's doing that. It just feels like he really wants to talk to somebody about it,
Yeah, yeah. You would
because
think. And another thing, BP, that stood out to me on my rewatch is the first shot that we get in this film on him. His eyes look incredibly buggy. Do you know what I mean? They're
yeah,
just popping out of his head, which I think is a
yeah,
great metaphor, for what's to come. It's so classic.
yeah. I feel like part of me goes to likes to think that he almost was hired, not just because of obviously his talents, but because of the fact that he does look like a fly, like because of his eyes and because his mannerisms, and he's constantly got these ticks and moving and stuff. And obviously a lot of that is going to be accentuated for the movie itself. But at the same time, we know Jeff Goldblum, and we know he's like, as if he's like, just putting sugar into his mouth constantly, and before he goes to do an interview, and next thing you know, you've got like the best interview that you've ever had in your life. We know what Jeff Goldblum's like, so it wouldn't surprise me if his features did actually play a part in him getting him casted in this movie. But once again, like, that's nothing that we can ever be like sad about, because then we get this, which is great. So yeah, so he gets straight into the movie. He takes Gina Davies back to his place, sort of explains all, but then she's like, "I've got to report all this shit," and he's like, "Well, maybe don't, like, please don't, because then everything's out there and it's not finished." So he sort of makes a deal with her, that she will sort of work with him, and it seems and starts off to be a good partnership, until it all goes tits up. And essentially, during a drunken rampage that he goes on, which unfortunately goes to show that alcohol in this situation and in most situations is the worst fucking thing for anything, because when you get drunk, you make the wrong choices. And in this, the wrong choice was not doing anything properly, and not knowing that a fly gets into the telepods, and the rest is sort of the history of the movie. And it's where this movie goes that I'm really excited about talking about. Like, it's the uniqueness and the originality of this movie is so incredible, and it's exciting. Like, the whole movie is just an exciting movie, and you're constantly on the edge of your seat to see where it's going next, or the evolution of Brundlefly, as he's known.
Yep.
The evolution of where he goes as a character is interesting, but also there's a little bit terrifying about it as well.
Yeah, and to point out something from that scene that we're talking about, uh, I thought about how if Gina Davis's character, if Ronnie never left that night, right? And he feels jealous about where she's going with the ex-boyfriend, he may not have gotten into that pod that night, and that fly wouldn't have been in there with him. So it's like, I think about this almost as not only a horror film, body horror, spliced with sci-fi a little bit and all that, but it's also a bit of a tragedy when you think
Yes.
about it, right? There's a bit of a
Yeah.
love story there, and it's a bit
Yeah.
of a tragedy because of the decision he makes on a drunken stupor to get in that pod, without knowing what's going on, all the details, and look what happens. So that's something that really stood out to me. If Ronnie didn't leave this movie, we don't even have it, right? It's a completely different story
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. And I take that, the older I get, the more I watch this, the more that, even though it is a horror, even though it's a sci-fi and everything like that, you do actually like take the love story and the tragedy away from this the older that you get.
Hmm.
A lot when you're younger and you're watching, you're like, that looks fucking cool and shit like that, and all the body horror and everything like that. But as you get older, and I think that, and one thing, and that's a really good way into talking about something, obviously, I always talk about on the show, and that's the performances. Luckily, we haven't got a lot of people to talk about, but the love story in this, it wouldn't work the way that it does if it wasn't for both of these. The chemistry that they have in this movie is some of the best chemistry that's ever put to film on screen. As far as I'm concerned, there's not much better than Goldblum and Gina Davies in this. But the older I get, and I said, the more I see about this love story, the more of more heartbroken I feel for Gina Davies when I watch this this movie. And I think she's so good in this that I feel so sorry for her in so many moments. And there's a specific moment I'll talk about, but this is once again a role where, unfortunately, where Hollywood essentially has roles for female actresses that are essentially there to do this part, while the male goes off on this bigger part doing everything that they, and carrying the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And even though Jeff Goldblum is so good in this, he doesn't carry this movie because of how good Gina Davies is. But there's the moment that breaks my heart every time, where, and we'll talk about that scene, so I won't go into it too much, where he goes and has his arm wrestling match, and we'll talk about that, I'm sure. So I won't say about that too much. But he obviously takes this woman home, where he's trying to get somebody to take part in his experiment to teleport them and so on, to try and get it to work. And there's the moment where Gina Davies turns up in the morning, and she says the famous line that's even at the intro of my show on the audio,
Mm-hmm.
be afraid, be very afraid. And what's funny as well is that could sound so fucking awful, like so cheesy, but it works in this movie because this movie is a fucking weird movie,
Mm-hmm.
but in the best ways. But when the lady says that he's with, I can't remember her name, but the woman that he's with, that's not Gina Davies, when she says, mentions about them spending the night together or whatever, they have a shot on Gina Davies' face. And there's not many more depictions in cinema that I've ever seen of depicting heartbreak just through features. Like, she doesn't say anything, but her eyes, like, her facial expression, it breaks my heart every time I see that scene. And if it wasn't played the way that Gina Davies did it, it wouldn't have that impact.
Mm-hmm.
And it's such an incredible performance in this that you get from everyone. Like, Gina Davies is phenomenal. And she breaks my fucking heart. And she's obviously gorgeous in this movie as well, which
She
does
is.
help.
Yep. Yeah, Gina Davis doesn't get talked about enough for me. I love her. Going back, rewatching, a lot of her work from this time into the '90s, even some of her roles later on. She's just a one of a kind actress. She's so good, so understated. She dials up the emotion when she has to. But yeah, people aren't talking about it enough. People aren't talking about these two performances enough, I feel, because I'm with you. Both of the leads are extraordinary in this film. So all the flowers to Gina Davis. She knocks it out of the park in this movie.
Yeah, absolutely, and it just goes to such a testament to her abilities that, once again, like I've already mentioned, this is just a role that could have just been what it is, and it lends itself to the story of Seth and Brundlefly and everything like that. But she managed to create a role that is part of the movie and not just something that's there. And as I said, there's so many moments that she has in this movie, not just the chemistry, but when she's on her own or when she's, brokenhearted and stuff. And you truly get the sense that there was a love that could have been, but never was. And it's very, very sad. And like you said rightly, it is a tragedy. But Jeff Goldblum, we've already spoken about him a little bit, but there's not really, you can't not talk about him because, and like you mentioned at the start as well, there's no one in this role that could have done it the way that Jeff Goldblum does. So I've got a list on my phone. I've said it before of the most inspirational performances to me of all time. This is up there near the top of the list. It's one of the first names that I ever wrote on that list was Jeff Goldblum in The Fly. There is so much uniqueness to his performance, so much like honesty in his performance, that everything he does, everything he says, the movements he makes, like, it's all purposeful, and I love that. I think he's incredibly underrated as an actor when it comes to not the Jeff Goldblumisms.
Yep.
Like, and what I mean by that is Jeff Goldblum's are very good at playing someone that's not nice, and he doesn't get that as much. And even though, like, obviously at the start of the movie he is a nice person, but as we go through the movie gets darker, and the character of Seth gets a lot darker, and then obviously it goes to the places that it does. But his transition from doing that sort of stuff and being this nice person to being fixated on his experiments and trying to get these telepods to work, and then realizing that it has worked, but in the worst possible way. And he starts getting darker and darker in tone of the movie, but he gets darker as his character throughout the movie. I think that's the side of Jeff Goldblum that's underrated, because we look at Jeff Goldblum a lot of the time, and a lot of people obviously now, and go, oh, it's Jeff Goldblum playing Jeff Goldblum. But earlier on in his career, he was Jeff Goldblum, the actor, giving some of the best performances that you'll ever see.
Agreed.
So he's phenomenal in this movie. And what obviously is absolutely incredible about this movie, that obviously a lot of the prosthetics that he's wearing throughout the movie is obviously him. And obviously we're getting to the prosthetics and everything as well. But the prosthetics in this movie are some of the greatest you ever see. But the fact that he's still being able to act the way that he does and have these like movements and the tics, and it's almost every stage that he goes through, whether it's the stage where he's sort of like limping with and spewing up fly gut, sick and everything like that, and the fly puke and everything like that, and the way that he does that, and he has that great line where he's sick it up and he's like, "Oh, that's gross," and just like. But it's done the only way that Jeff Goldblum can do it, when he's just sitting there completely straight faced, and it just comes out of his mouth, and he just sits there. Oh, that's gross, and it's just so good, and the delivery is perfect. But that you have those like comedic elements in it as well with Goldblum's performance, and I think that's one of the things that's sort of underrated with this movie as well. That as tragic as this movie gets and as dark as this movie gets, those moments where it's sort of light. And mostly obviously led by Jeff Goldblum, it's laugh out loud funny. Like, I literally laugh my fucking arse off. And I don't know whether it's because of my true, genuine affection for Jeff Goldblum, or whether it's just the fact that it's incredible writing, which it is, an incredible, storytelling and so on, and delivery. But I don't know. This film's funny, right? It's not just me.
No, it is. And it is all on the back of Jeff Goldblum. It's just his decisions, the way he carries himself, his eyes, the way the eyes are moving all around. He's constantly thinking. And
yes,
he's so good at balancing that comedic element with darkness, with tragedy, vulnerability. He takes all those things and he can balance them so good that it almost feels natural and organic.
Yeah.
And it doesn't even feel like a performance. It just feels like like Seth Brundle is who we're seeing. We forget that we're watching a performance. And you think to yourself, in real life, even when you're going through tough times, there's a little bit of comedy there. Stuff happens sometimes that you have to chuckle about. So I think that's done so well in this movie. And I think you're right. I think a lot of it is Jeff Goldblum. I don't know how much of it's the writing. I think it's mostly his delivery and the way he carries himself in this film, and pretty much everything he does. I mean, look how hilarious he is in Jurassic Park. He's the bright spot in that movie as well. So it's just this guy and what he does. He's an expert at it.
Yeah, he's one of the most, if not the most unique actor that I've ever watched. Because like you're saying, like, look at it in Jurassic Park, once again, sexiest nerd that you'll ever fucking see. But it's weird. Like, it doesn't make sense. Like, he's just so cool.
Yep.
But yet he's the guy, like he's so cool, yet he's the most intelligent man in the room. And you get, obviously, you get a sense of that in real life as well, like with actually Jeff Goldblum. But in his movies, he's still the coolest guy, but yet the most intelligent man in the room as well. And there's no one that can do that. Like, there's no one that plays it, especially in the way that Jeff Goldblum does. And like I mentioned, you get that in this movie from the get-go. You get that from the first moment the film starts. He's already in, like, not only am I being an absolute nerd and trying to talk about this shit, but also at the same time, I'm trying to get you into bed. And it's just absolutely incredible. And there's no one that fucking does it like Jeff Goldblum. He's just like so cool, but yet so nerdy, and it's just like they created a new mold when they made him.
Yep.
That's the way I look at it. Like
Yeah,
he's a super, like he's a superhuman.
yeah, he's smooth and awkward all at the same time. It's something
Yeah.
to behold. It really is.
And even throughout this movie, even when he's transitioning, like I said, from the walking sticks to really turning into Brundlefly, where his nails are coming off and he's hunched over and he's a bit Quasimodo and stuff like that. Even then, it's the mannerisms and it's the Goldblumisms that are coming out that if you didn't have someone like him playing this role, it would have just been somebody like in a scene where he looks in the mirror and stuff like that. It would just be them looking in the mirror. But with him, you're so fixated on every single movement and thing he's doing because you're waiting for the next thing that he's going to do or going to say.
Mhm.
And there's not many people that can do that. And I think that's what makes this movie really stand out is, one of the things that makes this movie stand out is the performances, not just Goldblum, but Gina Davies. And of course, John Getz as well, who plays the ex-partner to Gina Davies. Always forget his name. I can't remember his name. But he obviously starts out. Once again, this is such good writing because he starts out being a smarmy piece of shit.
Yeah, an
Like
asshole. Oh,
yeah,
100%.
exactly. He's an
Yes.
asshole. But then halfway through the movie, when we find out that Gina Davies is, they try and tackle a tough subject of abortion because she's now pregnant. He like flips completely, and he's now like really nice because he's just like, I want to help you as much as I can because
Mhm.
I sort of see the threat of what Seth has become and could be to you, and I want to keep you safe in a way. Although you still do get the sense that he's trying to get into a pants still, but at the same time,
Yeah.
it's such a unique twist on a character trope where normally this person's just a piece of shit, and you at the start of the movie you're like, well, this person's just going to die.
Mhm.
But then when it gets to that point where we do get the point, obviously where he loses his hand with the melting hand and the melting foot, and some fucking horrible bad things happen to him. Then you sort of feel sorry for him because he's like he in the movie he's got almost like a really small redemption arc where he goes from complete arsehole to almost like trying to be a complete savior to Gina Davies, and obviously it goes fucking wrong for him. But but it's such an interesting way of a character of changing who they are throughout a movie that's an hour and a half.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those times where it subverts your expectations because, like you said, such an asshole that you just instantly think, okay, I'm rooting for this guy to die, right? But then you get
Yeah,
that arc, and you do feel bad for him by the time we get to the climax of the film because it does seem like he's looking out for Ronnie and has her best interest in mind, even if he is still trying to get into her pants. But the point is,
yeah,
it's almost as if he actually does at his core care. And I think a lot of it maybe we can think of it like maybe he's just putting on that macho image and being an asshole because he thinks
yes,
he has to be. But deep down, he
yeah.
really cares for Ronnie. So that really comes through. And it really does make for an interesting turn of events when we get to the climax of the film.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. And as you were saying that, literally a second before, I was thinking the same thing, where it is that sort of the machoism, so to speak, where like I'm a man and this is how I have to be. And obviously, the depictions of how they put that into cinema is obviously always heightened. Like everything in cinema is always heightened, especially this movie because everything in this movie is heightened. But it's a really cool way of changing a character's arc within a movie, which, like I mentioned, is absolutely insane because this is an hour and a half movie. And I don't think I've ever experienced as much in an hour and a half movie than you do in The Fly.
Hmm.
It feels like you're watching, and not in a bad way, in all the best way, it feels like you're watching a movie that's like 2.5 hours
Agreed.
because because so much happens in it. And it's relentless, like it's constant. It's like here's the stuff. I mean, we already know that it's constant and relentless because it opens as it does. But from that point on, it doesn't let up. There's always something happening, and there's always something incredibly interesting happening that you can't wait to watch that moment. But like I keep mentioning, because of the performances, because of the writing, because of the story and the uniqueness, you can't wait to see where it goes next. And then before you know it, the film's over, and then you're like absolutely fucking gutted that it's finished because you're like, I want more of this.
Yep.
Because there's not many. I'll say something now, and I'll get into it anymore. But there's not many more movies, like I've already mentioned, that on every tick box, on every basis, hits everything. This is one of those movies that does, and it does it in an hour and a half, which is fucking mental. Like, that's insane.
It really is. Yeah, this does so much in its runtime that I look at films that are so slow paced, and it's like, you can get a 2 hour film and nothing happens. We get this movie and so much happens in such a short period of time that it feels a lot longer, like you said, but not in a bad way, because it speeds through. But you get so much story, and you're left wanting more at the end of it. It's just so well executed.
Yeah, absolutely. Talking about being executed, there's a couple things that I obviously want to talk about in regards to the peak example of execution in regards to, as I said, a couple things. So the first thing you have to talk about, and like you mentioned at the start, this is body horror at its finest. And there's not many better examples of this. Obviously, we will always have things like The Thing and The Blob and stuff like that from '88, and there's so many great examples of body horror, but this is one of the great examples because obviously everything that it does truly lends itself to the story as well, and it isn't something that has it there to be out of place. It has it there for a purpose, and I think those are the body horrors that work so well. When you think about The Thing and stuff, the interest, the still, no matter how good everything is, it effects wise in something like The Thing or The Gremlins, it's still the story and the characters that are driving it. The effects that are there to lend their hand to the telling of that story, and they do that. That's the thing about the Fly, is that it does that the effects are there when they need to be, but when you see them, they fucking blow your mind that in '86, like, this is what they did. So Chris Wallace is the person that worked on the special effects from this. Obviously, he is a legend. He created the Gremlins. Gremlins is obviously one of the greatest movies of all time. For me personally, the Gremlins is one of my favorite movies ever. It's one of my most watched movies, if not possibly my most watched movie I've ever, in my entire life. But part of that is, like I've mentioned, that we're on this journey with Billy and with Gizmo, but it's all about everything that happens throughout the story, and then how the Gremlins lend themselves to the telling of the story. But yeah, it's done in the best fucking ways. Like Gremlins, when I watch Gremlins still, it's like this. I sit there, and when I've finished, my jaw's on the floor, because I'm like, how do they create this? Like, these are the type of the movies that, even though I watched The Fly, in my teens and stuff, when I watched Gremlins for the first time, Evil Dead, all those sort of things, Alien, they're movies that that truly leave me in awe, because I'm like, I don't understand it. I don't understand how real people made these real things, and the artistry that goes into this, especially like body horror and so on, like the artistry that goes into it is so incredible that, like, still to this day, I don't get it. Like, it's one of those things that doesn't compute in my brain, where I'm like, how can you be so fucking good at this and create something so incredible that lends itself to the story? And the fact that we genuinely are heartbroken by a fucking disgusting looking fly man telepod thing, who isn't a person, like, it's not real. But that moment where he wants her to kill him,
Yep.
to shoot him in the head, because that's it. Like, he knows, like, that's it. When you look into that eye, it's like looking into, like, Wally or like a Pixar character. Like, when you're like, don't, like, I want nothing. I love you. Like, you know what I mean? Like you don't want anything bad to happen, because it's got those big bug eyes and stuff. And the fact that they managed to help, like, you have an emotion for something that's not real, that's what blows my mind.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up. It's that final scene when Seth gets transported once again, and now he gets merged with, pieces of the pod as well. And you sit there and you think to yourself, where did it all go wrong? Why did it have to go this way? And then
Yeah.
as he's approaching her, and then he holds the shotgun up to his own head and says, just do it. Put me out of my misery. Protect yourself and our child. It gets me a little emotional. I'm thinking to myself, why am I emotional for this creature, this nasty looking creature? But it's all in the storytelling and the performances. Once again, BP, it's absolutely amazing, and that climax is one of the greatest climaxes in the history of film for me, for all those reasons and so much more.
Yeah, and then and what's interesting is that just like the abrupt start, it's an abrupt end, and
100%.
that's what's so clever in this movie is that we get thrown straight into it, but we're essentially thrown straight out of it at the end. She shoots him, he's gone, he's dead, and she's left to essentially live the rest of her life with living with this, and then that's what starts making you think about beyond the movie, that the tortured mind that Gina Davies will now have for the rest of her life, and what happens with that kid. You know, does she have it? Does she not? And so on like that. And movies that aren't good don't make you think about that. Movies that truly have an effect on you emotionally, like this movie, makes you think about those sort of things, and that's why we're lucky when we get movies like The Fly, and that's how I feel when I watch movies like The Fly. I genuinely feel lucky. I feel lucky that they're there to be inspirations to filmmakers, actors, people that want to make special effects, and people that are creating cinema and so on. We're lucky we've got that as to go. Okay, like if we want to make something good, then we've got to make something like The Fly. Um, but it's also there for us as viewers to sort of feel lucky knowing that that a movie as good as this can make us feel something, even though what we're watching, like Brundlefly at the end and all fucked up, like that's not even real, but it's making us feel something. So there's Chris Wallace and the team and everything, everybody that he worked on and everything that they did on this movie throughout the different transitions of the way that he is in this movie. The effects are absolutely mind blowing, and you've got obviously the effect of the arm breaking in the arm wrestling scene, and that is still a scene that every time it happens, I still get like a pain in my arm where I'm like, oh, that would fucking hurt.
Me too.
And it's just done so well. And then obviously we get the scene where he's doing his fly stick all over John Getz, whatever his bloody name is. John Getz, and he melts his hand or arm like Raiders of the Lost Ark sort of style. And then he sort of melts his foot as well. But what is great about this, and this is what we used to get back in the 80s and with all these effects, is that they never shy away from it because they're so proud of everything that they're trying to create, that they want to show you everything. Now they don't want to show you anything because it's either CGI or it's just very basic sort of stuff. And very rarely do we get practical effects like this, things that are going to blow your mind and make you feel things that you never thought you could for something that's not real. And when you watch this movie, like you feel like that, and it's just such an incredible achievement. But those moments in it where you get his melting hand, his melting foot, or like I said, the transitioning of Jeff Goldblum from Seth to this to full on Brundlefly, the way that they do those transitions, obviously we know, like his dick's fallen off because he's got it in a thing and stuff like that in his little, medicine cabinet. There's no medicine cabinet. It's just limbs and bits that have fallen off himself. And that's funny within itself. But also, once again, like you mentioned, like, what's funny about this is that it's one of those things where you sit there and you're laughing and then afterwards you go, oh, that's sad, isn't it? Like, yeah, because he's not a dick. He's not a horrible person.
Not at all.
He was in love. Gina Davis and him were in love in that short space of sort of time that they had together. They were in love. They were a great partnership. But then it just went tits up. He's not a horrible person. It just something bad happened to him. and that's, like I said, like you mentioned, the tragedy of this movie is that that a bad thing happened to a really good person, and that happens to both of them.
Exactly.
Obviously, with Jeff Goldblum, well, with Seth, he turns into what he becomes, and Gina Davis has to watch him become what he becomes, and it's a really sad movie when you think of it like that. But then you still really enjoy the journey that you're on with it for, like I mentioned, an hour and a half, which is fucking insane.
It is, yeah. And a couple things I wanted to point out quick that you were talking about. To your point, the practical effects are amazing. Do practical effects. They're so much better than CG. And then the makeup. The makeup is extraordinary. It won the Academy Award for Best Makeup, and it should have, because it is
Yeah.
just second to none when we get that transformation of Seth. Every time we go back, he's deteriorating even more, and it's just unbelievable. And then back to Goldblum's performance, it's amazing how he does each stage differently. And
Yes.
inside all that makeup and the suits and whatever he had to wear as he changed form is unbelievable that he's able to do all that underneath everything and make it uniquely different in each stage of the transformation. Unbelievable, BP.
Yeah, absolutely. It's sad because when you watch these movies, like from your childhood and had all this, and when you watch these movies, even if it's the first time you see it, it still like feels like you're almost watching like a lost art now, and that's really sad
Yep.
because we want that. And in fairness, what's insane about the cinema industry is that every time a movie comes out that is creating stuff practically, you look at like the numbers that those movies are making. Yes, they cost more to make, but the numbers, especially when it comes to horror movies, because we all know that horror essentially saves cinema
Yep.
constantly. You might
Absolutely.
have like the Marvel movies and stuff, but every time a horror comes out now, people are flooding to the cinema. It's making over 100 million all the time, and obviously, like Alien Romulus has made a load of money. I think it's like the most successful like R movie or R-rated movie or horror movie for this year so far. And obviously a lot of money goes into these movies that are practical, because obviously that movie was very practical. But there's nothing more exciting as a viewer of movies to sit there and watch a movie that's real and to see the artistry that goes into it, because that's what I do. I get taken out when I watch these movies. When I'm watching them, I'm in so much, it's so much joy to see something that people have created. And
Hmm.
I'm not just the movie and the performances, and they're creating the characters, the people in the movie, but seeing people create things like we used to get, like this movie and Gremlins and all those sort of things. Real people who were so good at their job created these things, and we were lucky enough to witness that. And I feel like when we were watching these movies and get the chance now to watch these movies, it has a bigger effect on us because we're like, that's real. And people made that. And obviously, people are making CGI, and it's not an easy job. And they don't get any time to do it and so on like that. But that's the companies, that's the greed machine. That's the money makers, they saying, you've got this time to do it. And they might fight back and say, well, it might not look any good. And they're like, but this is the time and it needs to be out here. And then it's not fair on them. So I know CGI gets a lot of shit, but also the problem with CGI, and if you see bad CGI, that's because those people haven't been given the time to do what they want, because they cut costs using CGI, but they cut costs to try and create CGI on the cheap or as quick as they can. And then those artists, and they are still obviously incredible artists that make these making CGI, they unfortunately don't get to do the job that they want to make or they want to do. The advantage of practical effects is back then is that was such a huge part of movie making, that they were given the time, and they had these big warehouses and they had everything and this crew, and they were given a lot of money to create the best special effects that you've ever seen. But then when we get them, you're like, well, they're the fucking best thing I've ever seen.
Yeah.
So it's almost like cinema now is almost like counterproductive. It's like, we're going to bring out this movie with CGI, but it's going to look shit. It's going to take everybody out of it. It's not fair on the people creating the CGI, because they're the ones that get the bad rap when you're like, you made some shit CGI. and they're like, but I had like a day to do it, and it's not fair. And so that sucks for them. But at the same time, like I said, it's counterproductive because everybody wants real things to see, and they want to see the artistry of what people can create. I mean, look at Terrifier and Terrifier 2, you know, like they were huge successes at the cinema, even though Terrifier 2 was an unrated movie. People flooded to see it because of Art the Clown, and you were going to see some fucking gnarly shit. And people want that.
Mm-hmm.
But yet we still don't get it, and it's sad. Anyway, that's my rant about the fucking cinema industry, because it's supposed to be talking about The Fly.
It's all good.
But yeah, so Chris Wallace, obviously, as I said, absolute legend, and back then it was just filled with just iconography for this genre because of, you know, we got to experience things that we had never seen before, and those things that we had never been seen before were created for real by real people and not robots. So the other thing I do want to mention, because we've spoken, you know, none of this would have been possible, and none of this would have been as good as what it is. In a way, obviously, we get the great performances and we get the great, you know, special effects and incredible score and music and everything like that. This movie has obviously incredible music as well, but it wouldn't be possible without David Cronenberg.
100%.
David Cronenberg, obviously, you know, director of Scanners, Videodrome, The Brood, A History of Violence, when he went that little bit less weird and a little bit more Hollywood,
Mm-hmm.
and then he started his love of Viggo Mortensen and put him in every fucking film he did. But yeah, obviously he's created, you know, like a history of cinema, and obviously a lot of it is body horror. A lot of it is created incredible effects, like we saw in head exploding in all these sort of classic movies where Michael Ironside, instead of losing his arm, loses his head for once. David Cronenberg is a fantastic director, and this movie is a genuine prime example of that. I mean, this is my favorite Cronenberg movie. I don't know if it's yours.
It is. It is. For a lot of reasons. The two performances is definitely part of it. It's the nostalgia I have. Weird to have this movie, you know, give you a feeling of nostalgia, but it does.
Yeah,
But it is for a lot of reasons, like I said. But I wanted to point out, like you said, Cronenberg has such a tone to his films that are so uniquely him, and I like how a lot of them, especially the early ones, have a very cold, clinical feel to them. Like I think of a movie like Dead Ringers, which is a very slow movie and hard to
yes,
sit through, but you know, with the equipment that's used in that, it's just all very scary. I mean, if you have fear of going to the hospital, movies like that like really get under your skin, and that's some of the things I really love about Cronenberg. Because, like you said, body horror, there's probably nobody in cinema that's done it as well as effectively as he has. You know, with Videodrome, for example, with The Brood, it's just he's like the master at that. And but The Fly, without a doubt, you know, story wise, characters, even though there's not many, but the characters, the performances, yeah, it's just it's a masterpiece for me. So it's my absolute favorite of his, and a big reason why I love him as a director.
yeah, absolutely. This is like I mentioned. This is my favorite Cronenberg movie, and what I love about Cronenberg is he isn't afraid to go bold. He isn't afraid to do essentially anything, but somehow he managed to make these weird movies make sense. And it's like this, for example. So this is a movie that could be so fucking confusing. It could be like a Christopher Nolan movie where
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you're like, I don't fucking understand it, and that's either me being dumb or it is actually confusing. But there's very, very little like moments in this movie where you're like, oh, I've got to try and understand something here. Like this movie, like from start to finish, it is what it is. Like Seth is a scientist and he is this. This is what he's trying to create. We're not going to go into the nitty gritty of how he's done this, why he's done this, the intelligence of it all. It just is like he's a scientist. He's trying to make this go here to here successfully, and that's it. And I love that. But he does that a lot in his movies where he's managed to create something that's weird, that could honestly be so overly complicated, could be something that doesn't make any sense, and you can get lost in the idea and the story rather than focusing on the other moments in the movie that you should be focusing on. But yet somehow he's such an intelligent director. Like that's when you know that you're watching something by somebody that's an intelligent filmmaker. Like I mentioned, Christopher Nolan. There are movies like for example, Inception. That was a really popular film. It made a load of money, and I think what that managed to do was take an incredibly complex idea, but make it for dumbos like me that can watch it and still understand it. And that is a very difficult thing to do when you've got a filmmaker that truly understands cinema and story and structure and start, middle, and end, and how you put that together. When you've got a filmmaker that can do that, that's when you know that you're witnessing something special, because they're not trying to overcomplicate it. They're just going, this is what it is, and take it for what it is. And we're just going to put it out there for you to sort of make your own mind up about it. And if you want to fucking overcomplicate it yourself, then do it. Like, does the spinning top stop at the end? I don't give a fuck. But have I thought about it? Yeah, absolutely. Of course I have. So, that's the thing. We all make our own mind up with these things. But David Cronenberg is such a very, very clever filmmaker. And I really like that you mentioned about Dead Ringers and how that looked, and how a lot of his movies have these looks about them. What I love about this movie is that, and once again, it goes into sort of the special effects and stuff like that as well, is that he very rarely hides anything in his movies. This film is shot where you see pretty much everything. Like the cameras that we've got here, where we've got everything showing in the background. He's like an old school filmmaker, which is the best style of filmmaking, where you will do close-ups when you need to. If you want to depict an emotion, whatever the emotion is, yeah, that's when you do a close-up and stuff. But everything else, you want to see it all. And we get that, in where Seth lives in his warehouse sort of thing, and he's doing his fucking gymnastic shit spinning around. We see it all the practical effects. We see everything. The telepods, we see everything. And the lighting in it is bright, and nothing's in the shadows. And that is such, like, to have the balls to do that as a filmmaker. That to me is who David Cronenberg is. That, like, he's a guy that literally just has the biggest balls and says, just fuck off, and this is what it's going to be.
Yeah, and I think he understands the effect of atmosphere, and that's why I think he shoots that way. And it's so smart to do that. And some of the great directors have done that, like Kubrick's of the world, and guys like that. They understand that. Show us the landscape, show us the atmosphere, let us feel like it's lived in, and he does it so well here.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, we've spoken about elements of this movie, and without every single element of this movie doing what it does, we wouldn't have what we've got. And that is what blows my mind about this movie, and that I was so excited about talking about it. And it's what, like I said, it's one of those movies that I watch and I'm in awe of every time I watch it. After I finish watching it, doesn't matter how many times I've seen this movie, and I've seen this movie a lot, and I'm sure you have as well. But every time I watch this movie, even though I know that I've watched something so tragic, I'm still so happy after I watch it, because I'm like, what a time that was when they made movies like this. And the fact that we were lucky enough to get these movies now that we can watch, and more people now can with the power of streaming and everything, it sometimes can be a bad thing, but a lot of the time it's a good thing, because now movies like this on, like, over here is on Disney Plus. And so now anybody that's on Disney and some kid can just click on it at 10 years old and watch The Fly and get their mind absolutely fucked. But they never forget it, and then The Fly will be like their favorite movie ever at 10 years old. And then they're like me, going to school and saying, have you seen The Fly? And fucking seeing, like, people's melting, and then your teachers get hold of it. And anyway, that was my youth, stealing Fangoria magazines and then getting told off by teachers talking about heads getting cut off.
Yep, I love it.
That's it. So that's The Fly. Obviously, we're going to get into our overall thoughts of the movie as well, and so on. I always like to shove in some production info, some facts as well. Obviously, not loads of them. But I always find these sort of things interesting, and sometimes people out there do as well. So it took nearly 5 hours to apply the most extensive makeup stages to actor Jeff Goldblum. We all know by now that prosthetics they fucking suck. They're not an exciting or a nice time for the actors. But the advantage is that in this movie, we get what we get from it, not just how they look, but how it's being performed by Jeff Goldblum. So we're super lucky. But for sitting down for 5 hours, getting all this shit on you, especially I'm sure if you're somebody like Jeff Goldblum, who's quite clearly got ADHD or something,
For sure.
imagine him sitting there constantly, moving and talking, and that must have been very difficult for everybody involved in that sort of situation.
Yeah, because like with that scene where he's dumping all the sugar in his cappuccino or his coffee that he's drinking, and he's talking rapidly, I'm thinking to myself, that's Jeff Goldblum. That's him.
Yeah.
He's just being
They
himself.
just put a camera there. They just put a camera there and just filmed it. They were just literally out for like lunch, and they put a camera there, and they were like, "Just put it in the movie." David Cronenberg's like, "Yeah, shove it in." Gina Davies wasn't acting when Jeff Goldblum's right ear fell off. Her reaction in the film was genuine, and she was genuinely shocked when it was filmed. And David Cronenberg kept the take of her reaction in the movie, so it's similar to like we were just talking about and joking about. But yeah, in the movie where his ear falls off, that's her real reaction. And to be fair, that's probably going to be anybody's reaction if somebody's ear falls off.
For sure, yeah, and it's good to know that was genuine because it felt like it. Otherwise, it was like the greatest performance I've ever seen.
Yeah, absolutely. But from Gina Davies, you expect it, right?
100%.
So Seth brags that he owns a restaurant-quality espresso machine in the opening scene. In The Life Aquatic from 2004, Jeff Goldblum's character owns that machine. So that's a cool little nod to The Fly. That Life Aquatic is such a fucking great movie. Another movie that suits Jeff Goldblum down to a T, as it does like Bill Murray and so on. But it's cool when there's a love for it. Like, that the director was just like, I love The Fly so much, and let's put something in there for those people that love The Fly, and they may or may not ever know. Mm-hmm. I mean, I wouldn't know that unless I looked on Google. So,
that's great.
So it's a nice little thing.
It is.
So this is what I said about the casting for Seth. So Michael Keaton, John Lithgow, James Woods, Robert De Niro, Mel Gibson, and Willem Dafoe were considered for the role of Seth Brundle. So this is what I found really interesting. And like I said to you earlier, that when you think about this movie, you're like, there's no one that could do this. And a lot of the time you get the list of people where you're like, that's fucked up. Like when I did the episode all about the Terminator, and Kevin Kline's name was on that list of people that could have been the Terminator. And you're like, nope, like never. Kevin Kline's good at what he does, but he's not the Terminator.
Not at all.
And then when I read that list, I'm like, okay, yeah, I mean, Michael Keaton. Yeah, I mean, like Beetlejuice, you know what I mean? Like, I can see that. John Lithgow, he's called Uncle John in our house because we got a poster of John Lithgow randomly somewhere. But John Lithgow, and you're like, okay, like, James Woods, we know what we're going to get from James Woods, just him fucking shouting and being angry at some point. De Niro's De Niro. Gibson, it'd just be Gibson, and Willem Dafoe as well, like another person that you're thinking about it. So it's really interesting that you have those people that, in all honesty, I'm like, they could probably do this role. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, you're like, but then that goes to show how good Jeff Goldblum is in this movie, that you take actors at that caliber who you think could still do this role, but yet you would never, ever replace Jeff Goldblum in this role with any single one of those people, because you would not get this performance. And that, once again, the reason I put that in there is not just to say that there's other casts that could have been, and that would be quite interesting, but the fact that it goes to highlight how important and how good Jeff Goldblum is in this movie, that other people could have done it, but couldn't at the same time.
Yeah, not like I would like to see that movie with Michael Keaton in it, but at the same time, I'm with you. Nobody can do this role like Jeff Goldblum. Again, it's like I said earlier, it's almost like this, and I know this is a remake to a degree, but nobody can do Seth Brundle in this version other than Jeff Goldblum. It's just not going to work the same way. So, yeah, as fun as it would be with like Michael Keaton, for example, no thanks. I want Jeff Goldblum in this film forever.
Yeah, absolutely. This is like I've already mentioned. This is, I think it's just not looked at enough in regards to being one of the absolute utmost greatest performances of all time. Like, I genuinely believe that it is. I don't. There's a lot of great performances out there, and sometimes, I mean, we know what it is. Horror gets overlooked for every fucking thing in the world, so we know that that's why. But that's what makes it sadder, because there is no reason why Jeff Goldblum and Gina Davis should not have won awards for this movie. Like, they should have won Oscars, irrelevant of the type of movie and the genre that it is. These are two of the most perfectly played performances that you'll ever get in cinema.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't get what they should have. They didn't get the accolades that they deserved back then. And because of that, the knock-on effect is that it doesn't necessarily get the accolades it deserves now, or the respect that it deserves now, unless, you know, you're people like us that watch this movie from when we were young. You, luckily, even younger than me, you lucky bugger. And then and then we watch it now, and it's a real joy and a real treat to be able to see everything that this movie is. And a huge part of that, like every movie is the performances that drive the journey that you're on.
Mm-hmm.
And if it wasn't Goldblum, if it wasn't Gina Davies doing what they did, then this movie would still be what it is, but it wouldn't have the tragedy and the effect that it has on you if it wasn't because of them, and the laugh out loud, loud moments of him being sick everywhere.
Exactly.
So it's a huge testament to every single aspect of this movie. Like, I don't think, like, I hope when people watch or listen to this episode, I hope they truly understand how important it is to us, but also like the importance of every aspect we're talking about. Like, you can't oversell this, like, because every single thing is a 10 out of 10.
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing with this movie. If you take all these individual things, it's a 10 out of 10 movie. But anyway, I'm digressing as fucking usual. But one of the most challenging visual effects to achieve in the film was John Get's melting hand, like I've already mentioned at the end of the film. The shot was achieved in the same way as the melting face thingy, or the melting mug, whatever it was, in Raiders of the Lost Ark. They used the same sort of process of doing that. Both shots were supervised by makeup artist Chris Wallace, who, like you mentioned, won an Oscar for his work as well. So they used the same technique. But that's what's great about practical effects, is that it's a constant learning process. So you do one thing and it goes right and you use it again, or you goes fucking completely wrong and you learn from that and make it right next time.
Mm-hmm.
And that is why I love practical effects. Like, that's why I was stealing Fangoria magazines when I was a kid, because I would open a page and I would sit there and read. And do you know what? I was having this thought when I was thinking about the prep and stuff for this. What's insane is that, and this is how impressive that everything is that I was obsessed with practical effects when I was younger, because I was when I watched a movie, it was almost like when we had Tales from the Crypt Demon Night. Not the greatest movie ever, but I mean, it's fun as fuck, but it's not the greatest movie. And as well as the Fangoria magazines I used to take, there was a Tales from the Crypt Demon Night special souvenir edition that they brought out when the movie came out. And I got that. Didn't pay for it, but I got it, and then opened it up, and I was reading every page because I wanted to know everything about how they made this. But what I find really funny is that not at any point have I ever thought I want to be somebody that creates practical effects and stuff like that, because I know that the artistry that it takes from that, the minds, is on a different level. Like that's why I was just like, I just want to be in films and make movies.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want any part of that, because I want people who are going to be so much better at that, creating that for me. And that's the thing with practical effects, is that the people that create these things are fucking like geniuses. They're like otherworldly beings, that they manage to create these otherworldly things that they're putting on screen. And it just blows my fucking mind when I watch it. So when I was a kid, I was just obsessed with it. And even now, when I watch these movies, I'm just like, I'm just in awe, on awe, especially, you know, even when I always remember the first time I watched Terminator 2 and he takes his arm off like that. And I was like, fuck, like how, my first thing, literally, rather than going, that's fucking gross, I was just like, how the fuck did they did that? And then I wanted to try and find magazines that would have shit in
Mm-hmm.
and stuff. Now, when I get older, I'm like, oh, they did that quite simply. But but when I'm a kid, I'm like, that must have been the hardest thing in the world to do. Arnold Schwarzenegger hasn't got a fucking metal endoskeleton underneath him, so how'd they do it? And that's the thing, and you can tell by me talking about it, is the absolute joy of practical effects in these movies. So Chris Wallace in this movie, and then obviously, you know, Stan Winston, Rob Bottin, all these, Tom Savini, all these incredible people. Like, what I love about horror is that outside of it, they're not celebrated. Within horror, they're celebrated that they're fucking rock stars,
Yep.
and they fucking should be, because they're fucking rock stars that they've made our dreams come true.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So really quickly, to sum it all up, overall thoughts on the movie.
Well, for me, BP, it's one of my early horror memories. I should say, it's one of my early horror memories that has stuck with me all these years. Even as a kid, like you said earlier, maybe I didn't understand the tragedy of it all, but it was so gnarly looking, and that tone just stuck with me. It was very creepy, very ominous. Though even those pods freaked me out as a kid. For a while, I didn't want to go into anything that looked anything remotely like that thing. So for all of that, and then looking at the performances and the story, and now that tragedy aspect of it, this movie is one of the most important horror films for me of all time. As we've been saying all show, I don't think it gets talked about enough or celebrated enough for what it does and how effective it is, and then those two great performances. It's one of those movies that's, it's hard for me to do this, but it's one of those movies that's pretty close to me to perfect as far as what it's
Yeah,
setting out to do. You know
yeah,
what I mean? And how it
yeah.
does it, and those performances, the direction, the practical effects, the makeup, the score, everything in this film is as close to perfect, I think, as you're going to get. So I think it's a masterpiece, and I think it's one of the great horror films of all time that more people should place higher on that list of the classic great horror films in the genre. That's my overall summary of this great movie.
Awesome. I mean, this is another example as to why as people know, I don't pick really the films that I do on the show. I literally, when I know what guest I'm having on the show, I basically say, send me over a list of movies, and then I can try and find one that I can connect with, because that way I know that the person that sends me that list, they're movies that they really want to talk about, and then I can pick one because I'm like, I really want to talk about that as well. And that's why this episode is a prime example of why I do that, because everything that you just said there is the exact same thing as I feel for this movie. We've spoken about it enough, but when you said about how this film is pretty much damn near perfect, this film is, as far as I'm concerned, exactly the same feeling. This movie is, to me, and I will go on record to say this is one of the greatest movies that's ever been made. And that is when you think about horror, that's when you think about sci-fi, that's when you even think about a love story and a romance movie and a tragedy movie. This movie has it all in an hour and a half. So there's no complaining that it's too fucking long. It's an hour and a half of relentless everything. It's a relentless, incredible directing, incredible performances, incredible music, like you mentioned. It's got incredible special effects and some of the greatest you ever see. And it's so intelligent, so unique, so weird, but all in all the best ways. And you are exactly right. And as I said, this is why I love being able to talk about these movies. Now, a lot of people, so one of the reasons I started this show is to be able to talk about movies like this. And I know that there is so many newer movies that I should be talking about. And there are going to be some coming. So don't worry, I will do my best to try and talk about newer movies. But the reason that I started this channel and started the podcast, and like you mentioned, and like yourself, we get into that as well, is the solo episodes. And when I used to do it all on my own before I was lucky enough to start having guests, because I realized it was so much better to have these conversations with somebody else and not just with myself. But but it was the reason was because of movies like The Fly, because there is so many layers to these movies that unfortunately not a lot of new movies have.
Mm-hmm.
And movies like The Fly are iconic, classic, remembered because of what they are. So there are going to be films that I talk about that are going to be newer, and I'm going to try honestly my best for those people that want me to talk about the newer movies. I'm going to try my best, and I'm going to try to, but I've got to find them, because as we know on this show, I don't want to talk shit about a movie. I want to talk about all the best parts of cinema and the best parts of horror. And this movie is one of the best examples of cinema that there has ever been. From 1986, from that point onwards, there is not many better examples of a movie that, like you said, every box, everything's ticked, 10 out of 10. It's a perfect movie. This movie, and like you mentioned as well, this should be on as many people's as possible's lists of greatest movies of all time. When they do those lists of 50 movies, greatest movies of all time, if this isn't on it, then that list is fucking shit.
Agreed.
They need to get rid of it and start again, because this is one of the greatest movies of all time. And I honestly, I will go on record as that. Like when I, think about Alien, that's to me perfect movie, because as an actor and as a filmmaker, that feeds that inspiration for me in that regards. But as somebody who just loves and watches movies, that ticks every single box. The Shining is another example of that. There's so many. Well, there's a lot of examples because we think about them all the time, but in the grand scheme of cinema, there's not a lot of examples that do that. Seven, there we go. Seven's another one for me. That's another 10 out of 10 perfect movie. This belongs within those, and the fact that it's not really talked about as much within those is actually tragic, like the movie.
It is. I agree.
Favorite scene in the movie is something I always like to ask. What's your favorite scene in the movie? I always ask as well because it's interesting, because sometimes I like to wonder whether it's the same as mine.
This one's tough for me. I'm going to start by an honorable mention. I always loved that bar scene where he breaks the guy's arm with
Yeah,
the arm wrestling, because I love the way it's
yeah.
shot and I love the lighting, how it's red. It feels uniquely different than the rest of the movie, but
I was just about to say the same thing. It feels so different to the rest of the
it
movie.
really
Yeah.
does. It's a weird tone, but that's not my favorite scene. The one that has always stayed with me, and I can remember sitting there on the floor as that child watching this movie. It was when he's in the bathroom and his fingernails are coming off. And he
Oh,
starts to
yeah.
take the fingernails off and he squeezes the finger and the pus flies out and everything. Like, that's my
Yeah.
favorite scene, because that is body horror in its most
Yeah.
primal, way. So it's excellent. It's my favorite scene. It's the one that I've always thought about when I think of this movie. So it's definitely that one.
So here's a little bit of an insight into how fucked up my brain is. So because of that scene, I can't get my nails cut. I actually have to get somebody to do my nails for me. Very, very feminine, but very like my nails are painted for a reason, because that scene. Every time I think about cutting my nails or anything to do with my nails, that scene comes in my head, that I'm genuinely honestly concerned that my nails are going to come off. The nightmares I had when I was like 14, 15 years old because of that scene has now still had an effect on me, that I can't get my fucking nails cut, that it has to be done for me because I'm that fucking pathetic. But once again, like if this movie wasn't made the way that it was, I wouldn't have that trauma. My own trauma from this movie is that.
Hmm.
And you're right. Like there is not many more better depictions of what body horror is than that scene. And there are so many different moments in this because body horror is not meant to be like nice, you know, like it's meant to make you feel icky, meant to make you feel sick and a bit gross and stuff. That film makes me that moment always makes me want to fucking vomit every fucking time.
Me
Every
too.
time. So that's a great scene to have. And I think, and a lot of scenes like this, for me, my favorite scene in the movie, and this happens quite a lot when I have my favorite scenes, and that's because I think it's because a lot of them come down to either a difference in what the movie is or what it becomes, or a lot of it becomes down to how it makes you feel. And my favorite scene is the ending scene, and I think it's just because we've been on a journey with these characters, and they've been through the fucking shit in this movie. And at the start, like we've mentioned, it is essentially a love story between these two people that goes wrong, and it's so the ending to me is so sad. But it wouldn't work if everything wasn't working. And what's interesting is at the ending scene, obviously, it's not even fucking Jeff Goldblum, which is the whole film. It's been Jeff Goldblum, but it's not. It's just incredible prosthetics. Practical effects that have created something that isn't real that makes you feel real things. And it's such a sad ending. And Gina Davies plays that absolutely perfectly. Obviously, the lead up to that scene with the melting hand and the ankle is just incredible. But just that moment where she knows what she has to do but doesn't want to do it, and he knows that that's what has to happen. But you can even tell in his fucking giant bug eyes that he didn't want it to be this way. And because of who Seth was and the journey that you've been on him, and that he was the coolest, sexiest nerd that there's been, you know, it's one of the saddest endings that I've ever seen, with something that isn't, where one part of that isn't even a real person.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that they managed to make you to create a feeling in you like that is an absolute testament to this movie and how it's been made. So that's my favorite scene in the movie, because it's just artistry in every single form, done so well that it doesn't even have to be real to make you feel like real feelings. And I
Absolutely.
don't have many real feelings.
No,
Well, unless you make me cry at the start of the episode.
yeah, there you go. No, you're right. That climax, I said it earlier, one of the greatest climaxes in the history of cinema, not just horror. So I'm with you there. Great scene, without a doubt.
Yeah, absolutely. So on the show, obviously we've spoken everything we can really about The Fly. I mean, we could probably speak for fucking ever about The Fly. I mean, we could keep going on. I think everybody really, you've got a sense, if you're watching this, listening to this, you've got a sense of how much this movie means to us, and how much more we think it should mean to everybody else, if it doesn't already. There's probably people that are watching this or listening to us who hopefully agree with us and already go, this is one of the greatest movies of all time. What the fuck are they on about? But there might be some people out there who don't even know about The Fly, and trust me, there are, because I still speak to them. Well, hopefully this means that you'll go and watch it and then agree with us. If you don't agree with us, sometimes people can be wrong, and that's your fault. That's up to them. They can most of the time. Look, people can be right, can be wrong. If somebody's wrong about The Fly, that's on them, because The Fly is one of the greatest movies that's ever been made.
Agreed.
But on the show, I always have the time, the segment Your First Time, which is where I reach out and basically put on my socials where people can send me their first time horror movie memory, and I add it into the show. I absolutely love reading these. I love getting these through. I get nostalgic about them. And it's fun reading them where you are all getting nostalgic about them as well. So this one came from John Doe, ABC 32. And they said that was, and you can find them at John Doe ABC 32. This was sent over to me on Twix, which is Twitter and X, although apparently it might be going back to Twitter. I don't fucking know, but we call it Twix for now. They sent it to me on there, and they put that they were 8 years old visiting my uncle. He had just started watching Ridley Scott's Alien. We've already mentioned that, greatest movie. I walked in a couple minutes before the chest burster scene. The only word was, whoa. I have been a horror fan since, and Alien is tied for my favourite movie since then too. Yeah, I mean, for me, Alien's always going to hold a special place in my heart, because Alien was the first ever horror movie I ever watched at way too young. But it started me on my journey through horror. But it also, when I go back to it, it was movie that was a huge influence for me in regards to filmmaking and acting. And then after that, the second one was Evil Dead, and so on. And then it all spiraled from there. So it's always nice when somebody's journey started the same way as yours.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I mean, you know, if you walk in on the chest burster scene, then that's probably the best and worst moment to walk in on a movie.
Yeah, that's the type of scene that's going to stay with you without a doubt.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I always ask. Now, I know on the audio podcasts, when they were just audio, you've done this. You sent yours over to me as well, so I've read it before. But why not? Let's have it again. If you can remember it still, let's have your first time horror movie memory.
Yep, my first horror film was Carrie, 1976. Now, that's not when I watched it.
Nice.
Not when I watched it, obviously. I watched it when I was the very young age of 6. And it scared me to death, but I could not stop looking at the screen. The prom scene was just so dark and terrifying and thrilling and everything to me, and it's the reason why I love horror to this very day. So Carrie always has a special spot in my heart, because just like with Alien for you, it led me down my path to horror, which, even though I don't focus everything on horror, horror is my favorite genre of movie. I love everything about it. I love the way it makes me feel. I love that it can make you feel every emotion during its runtime,
Yeah,
and that is why it's the greatest form of entertainment out there. So that's my first time. Carrie.
absolutely. Awesome. And what I love about, and Carrie, as we know, is mostly known as the the Pig's Blood movie and stuff. But I think a lot of people do forget that Carrie is actually a fucking terrifying movie, and it's incredibly dark. And that when you watch it as an adult, it still is actually like a very dark, traumatizing movie, and you feel so much for Carrie, you really do. But it's a really terrifying movie. Like, it's one of my partners. It's one of her, if not, I can't remember if it is her first or one of them. I think it is. It's also her first horror movie as well, and that movie has stuck with her entire life as well. And that's why I do this segment, is because no matter what, and like you mentioned as well, you know, horror is the greatest genre, and it makes you feel everything, whether that's good or for bad. We never forget our first time horror movie memory. And that's why, since day one of doing this podcast, I've always had that segment, because I love reading them, but also I like the fact knowing that if it started you on your journey, or you were like, I watched a horror film and this was it, and I never watched one again, but that person never forgot it. And that blows my mind, and I love it, because horror, as disrespected as it is as a genre, and as we know that it is, it's actually the most important genre there is,
Agreed.
and is constantly fucking saving cinema, as I keep saying.
It does. It
One
makes
day
money.
there, listen to me.
Yeah.
One day, listen to me. Well, there we go. So if you want your first time horror movie memory read out on an episode, all you've got to do is go onto our socials, and just send me a direct message, and in detail, like John Doe ABC32 did. Probably read it wrong, but I'm just trying to read it. But either way, they sent it over to me on socials. You just send me it over there, and I will read it out. Think of it as well, it's almost like free promo for your show and everything like that. So there's no reason not to do it. It's fucking free, and we all get to have a good time reading it. But Justin, this is now your time. I want you to promote everything that you do with Pop Culture Reflections podcast, which I may have got wrong, probably.
Nope, you got it right. So
Finally.
yeah, good job. Pop Culture Reflections is me talking about my nostalgia for everything in pop culture, essentially from the 80s, 90s, and beyond. So, music, movies, television, pro wrestling, a little bit on toys and games. It's practically anything you can think of, from those eras all the way up to even today. I try to cover some newer stuff, not as much, because much like you, BP, it's all about my nostalgia, and what I have connections to is the whole reason for the show, and that's what I do. And recently, I've gotten into bringing on guests too, and I'm with you. I agree with you. I was doing a lot of them solo. It's fun to do, but it's really hard to just talk to yourself.
Yeah.
So having somebody you can bounce stuff off of and just talk together about a topic and what you both feel about it is really rewarding. So it's a good time. And I also wanted to just give a quick shout out to the rest of the network. You Run Podcast Network. A lot of great shows on there covering a wide variety of topics. So check that out as well on yourunpodcast.com. And you can find my show and all the previous episodes there as well.
Absolutely. So you've got obviously You Run podcast is hosted by Scott, who's a friend of the show, who's been on the show multiple times. Will be on the show as well for our Halloween spooktacular episode as well, which I'm looking forward to doing.
Nice.
I may or may not be dressed up in a non-movie accurate costume, so let's just say it turned up and it looked shit, so we'll see what happens. But yeah, so it's great. Obviously you're on that sort of broadcast, that sort of channel as well, but you can be found obviously on Spotify as well, and Apple Podcasts as well. Please make sure that you go and enjoy Justin's show. And what I love about it is exactly what you were saying there, is that it is so broad and the topics can be and will be endless, because you talk about it all and you have so much love for what you talk about. And we've had the same sort of journey. You know, I started this on my own, and it's not easy and it's tough. And like yourself, you know, you started it on your own as well. And now we're coming around like me. And I've said before, I never thought of having guests, and people would ask me and I would go, no, thanks. And then one day I took the gamble and tried figuring it all out. And I had my first ever guest, which was Chris, when I did, who was the Dead Meat Pete. He created the Dead Meat Pete show. Absolutely amazing. And he was my first ever guest, and we spoke about the Lost Boys, and I was absolutely shitting it and absolutely bricking it, and I was like, this is going to be the shittest thing ever because I'm so shit. And he was great, but when the second that finished, I was just like, oh, it's really nice talking to other people about it, rather, because I talk to myself in my everyday life. Do I need to do do I need to do that on a podcast? And as much as I enjoyed doing it and getting out my my love for the genre, and it was my mental health and my therapy, and it still is, but getting to have those conversations with other people as well, like yourself and so on, that truly is where the show obviously went and is going to obviously continue.
Mm-hmm.
But you're right, it's hard. And it's nothing but absolute kudos to you and to anyone out there that is on this journey on their own, because you're still doing it on your own. It's not as if you've got all these co-hosts and everything like that. You and me, we're both still doing and on this journey on our own. It's just the conversations we're trying to have with other people and recording them. Everything else is us. So we've screwed ourselves right fucking over. But everyone go and support Justin with everything he does, because you're never going to get bored. Like me, you'll probably get bored after one episode of mine because it's all about horror, and the next thing is going to be about horror as well. But with Justin's, it can be about anything that he wants, of pop culture reflections podcast, and it's so much fun. And I enjoy all the stuff that you did on your own, and like the heart that you speak with, which, you know, I try and do myself, and you do it great. But also, having guests on as well opens up the discussion and the conversations even more now, and becomes more broad and more chaotic, and it's so much fun. So I'm not going to say I'm not going to say what I was going to say, because that's incredibly patronizing. I was going to say I'm really proud of you. That's not what I'm going to say, because that's incredibly patronizing, and I apologize. But what I mean by that, in a way, and I mean it with my, you know, wholeheartedly, is that anybody that has been on this journey like I have, I know how tough it is, and I know that it's not easy. And before this came on, I spoke about how fucking tough it is at the moment, and how my mental health is not being good this week because of things outside of the podcast that's to do with the podcast, but it's nothing to do with anybody, you know, that's going to watch or listen to this. That's not your burden, that's my burden. So Justin knows how hard it is. So I'm really, you know, on his side on this journey with him, because I know the toughness of the journey, and he does it incredibly successfully. So I'm incredibly, you know, there for you, for you being on this journey, because it's a tough one, and you're fucking doing it. You're killing it, and that's all that matters.
Thank you, BP. You as well. I'm on your side as well. I told you in the beginning, I meant every word I said. You're a big inspiration, and I'm one of your biggest fans. So keep it up.
Thank you. That's awesome. Thank you, dude. And you know what? Just like this movie, The Fly, I will probably think about that what you said at the start of this. In fact, I will probably just have that on loop for the next 2 years, and then it will remind me that I've done something right to one person, and that's all that matters. In fact, if my partner ever says I'm doing everything wrong, I'm just going to hit play and go, but Justin thinks I've done something right. and that's all that matters. Well, anyway, so to close out the show, obviously, we have the patrons to thank. I always do on the episodes. Because, you know, obviously if it's audio, I can't have a fucking scroll bar or anything like that. So Patreon is incredible. The fact that these people going above and beyond to help me on my journey is incredible. We've got Flicks and Friends podcast. Thank you so much. You've got Jamie Burns, or Disco Doctor of Death, as I call him, or as we came up with his name and his nice little logo that I made for him. Disco Doctor of Death, thank you. We've got Leighton Collins, Rob Miller. The fact that you go above and beyond to help me on my journey is incredible. Never thought I would get any patrons. It was just there. And the fact that I have is insane. I have just started on my Patreon as well, the Creeps Choice episodes, which is where my honorary creeps that are on there, they choose a movie for me to watch, and I review it pretty much straight afterwards, exclusive to Patreon. They get it. And it's essentially like a little mini episode of this, but to them on Patreon. And I have told them, you can choose me the best movie you want, or you can give me the biggest piece of shit you've ever seen. Either way, I'm going to be honest about it. But that is on Patreon. So if you want to know more, you just go to patreon.com, look for Let's Talk Horror Channel. It's just on there. It's fucking there. I don't know. But whoever it is, not just me, if anybody out there, if you enjoy somebody's content that they're creating and they have a Patreon, show them the support, because it means the world. It's a massive motivator, but at the same time, it really helps us evolve and reach new audiences and everything like that. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get the word out of what we do, of my podcast and Justin's absolutely amazing podcast. We're trying to get it out there, and you all play the biggest part of that. I've said that since day one. You all play the biggest part of it. And you all mean the world to absolutely all of us as well. Anybody that takes their time to enjoy what we do, or hopefully enjoy what we do, we couldn't ask for more than that. And that's that means the world to us, and makes us feel nice and warm inside. Unlike the tragedy of the end of this movie, that doesn't make me feel warm inside; it just makes me want to cry.
Yeah, exactly.
So there we go. So Justin, thank you so much. For coming on the Let's Talk Horror Channel podcast, for coming into the Creep Zone where I am, where we had a great conversation about The Fly.
Thank you for having me. It was my absolute honor and a privilege. And yes, it was a great time talking about a great movie with a great guy.
Absolutely. Oh, here we go again. Look, you can set me off again. That's because I never expect anything nice to be said about me. So anyway, look. Thank you so much for anybody that's watched this, listened to us. It means the world to me. Until next time, stay creepy, fuckers.